Aaron David Miller is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and a former State Department Middle East analyst and negotiator in Republican and Democratic administrations. Aaron is a frequent commentator on CNN, MSNBC, NPR, and BBC, and his articles have appeared in the New York Times, The Washington Post, Foreign Policy, and Foreign Affairs. Aaron is an advisory board member for Moment's own Moment Institute Middle East Fellows Program. Joining Aaron today is Nadine Epstein, editor-in-chief and CEO of Moment Magazine and founder and executive director of the Center for Creative Change. Please welcome Aaron David Miller and Nadine Epstein.
Hi, Aaron. It's really good to have you with us today. It couldn't be, so much is happening. I know you're on vacation and I'm supposed to be taking the day off, but the world is moving so fast and there are so many shifts happening at this point when we're thinking about Middle East and Israel.
And
And
no rest for the weary, Nadine. I may be in Maine, but a large part of my day and in the days to come, at least the next week, are going to be spent, figuratively speaking, in Washington. But it's always wonderful to be here and do whatever I can to contribute and support Moment. It's an extraordinary moment, but Moment is also quite remarkable. And you as a leader, what you've been able to accomplish, Nadine, is really quite extraordinary. It reinforces my faith in the capacity of individuals to help shape things well beyond. And I know this is a passion. It's not a job for you. So
thank you.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. You're wonderful.
Thank you. Well, one of the things that really happened this week is something that really hasn't gotten that much press, and that I've written a lot about 1947, 1948, and you know how the Arab League turned down the opportunity to have two states in 1947, which led to 48, which has led to all these decades of conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestinians and Arabs. And here we had this week 22 countries in the Arab Leagues unanimously call for a two-state plan that would include a demilitarized Palestinian state, condemns the October 7th attacks, demands Hamas fully disarm and release all hostage, and rules out Hamas being involved in any kind of future governing of the Palestinians. And also something that Israel's long talked about, getting rid of kind of harmful material in Palestinian educational curriculums. Wow. I mean, to me, that it sounds like it's a big step. And I'm wondering, like, why now? Here we are. It's 2025, July 31st, 2025. Why now? What's happening?
Well, the Saudis, thanks for having me, Dean. The Saudis and the French convened a conference. Mm-hmm. And that statement, the Arab League, was done in support of and under the auspices of and in association with the conference in New York. Look, I am close to the head of the Arab League. He's a wonderful man. I think he would not disagree. I don't like double negatives, that the Arab reputation, the consequence, the resonance of Arab League proclamations on the positive side have been, in my judgment, few and far between. States act sometimes collectively in organizations, more effectively and more realistically, they act unilaterally. I would refer you only to the 2002 Arab Peace Initiative, so-called API, in which the entire Arab world offered its hand. If only the Israelis would agree to a Palestinian state based on June 6-7 borders, solution of the refugee issue, recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of a Palestinian state. You brought up 2025. I'll say to you that yes, it's 2025. That's 23 years later, after the Arab Peace Initiative was enunciated. You've had significant negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. The Kerry Initiative, Omer and Abbas. I think, frankly, the idea that the Arab the Arab states are prepared to accept a day after ending to the war in which Hamas would be demilitarized, I think is significant. There's no love lost, perhaps with the Qataris, but certainly not with the Emiratis and the Saudis when it comes to this organization. Look, this could be impactful if, in fact, you had what we don't have, which are leaders in Washington, in Jerusalem, and in the Palestinian national movement, which is now divided and dysfunctional, who could take advantage of this in order to create a rational and effective day after strategy to answer three basic questions. Because your reference to the Arab League, words on Hamas is important. There are three core questions. Who or what will govern Gaza? Who or what will provide the security architecture and structure that will preempt and prevent and make unnecessary a permanent Israeli occupation of Gaza, address Israel's legitimate security needs in the wake of October 7, and then who, what, and how will minister and attend to the humanitarian suffering and the reconstruction of Gaza. These three questions are fundamental to ending the war. And my concern about the way the Trump administration and certainly the Netanyahu government, Trump administration doesn't have a goal. The government of Israel does have a goal. And it's headed by the most politically ruthless, talented, and most significant politician in Israeli politics. He knows exactly what he doesn't want. So if you had an American president and an Israeli prime minister and some sort of rehabilitated, I don't know how you would, I mean, it's complicated, Palestinian leader in conjunction with key Arab states, not the Arab League so much as the Saudis, the Emiratis, and Israel's treaty partners. Because as you know, as well as I, geography is destiny. So the role that Jordan and Egypt will play here will be very consequential. But we don't have that. Now, you and I were chatting before. There are now reports. I would just point to two data points that have been recently announced. How significant, whether they're headlines or never to be headlines or trend lines, I don't know. Number one, the White House will announce tomorrow a new approach to Palestinian aid, a new U.S. approach. And number two, apparently, Mr. Witkoff and the Israelis are starting to look toward the possibility of a different approach to freeing the hostages and ending the war. Not an interim approach would proceed piecemeal or incrementally, but something akin to an all for all. All the hostages, living and sadly dead, in exchange for ending the war, presumably some Israeli redeployment. I do not believe the Israelis, under these circumstances, are willing to withdraw all of their forces from Gaza, but I think to a buffer zone that would run maybe north-south along the Gaza envelope communities, 1 kilometer wide maybe. If that were the case, and if the Netanyahu government and the Trump administration were serious about it, you know, we could actually see something that we haven't seen in 2 years. And I'll conclude by saying it is stunning to me, although maybe it shouldn't be, that in 2 months, a month or two months from next week, the war will have gone on for 2 years. Sufferings of the hostages, their families, the deaths of the hostages, the horrific, abominable situation of Palestinians, children, Palestinians in Gaza. Hard for me to believe even now.
Well, one of the things another shift I think that's happened in the last week, and perhaps this is all happening because on some level the United States has ceded its moral authority in the Middle East and is really perhaps working on a more transactional basis, but that Europe has also really kind of gotten involved, with France already announcing that it's going to recognize a Palestinian state, and the United Kingdom saying that they may do that as well, and a number of other countries considering this. And I'm wondering, like, what is the significance of this? And is it part of a broader strategy?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Look, I'll say a couple of things. In my judgment, even though it seems like a fantasy, an idea more appropriately tethered to a galaxy far, far away, rather than the realities back here on planet Earth, I continue to believe that the only solution that addresses all of the underlying structural impediments that drive the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is separation through negotiation. I see no other alternative. Now, separation into what? Confederation? Two states? I don't know. But October 7th demonstrated with a terrifying clarity that Israeli and Palestinians cannot live together happily ever after under one roof and without satisfying Israeli security needs and the national aspirations of a much aggrieved people. You and I are going to be having this conversation for many years to come. That's point one. Number two, I will also say that I was present, this is the last day of July, I was present 25 years ago, July 13th to the 25th at Camp David, which was the last, in my judgment, the last serious effort, the only effort that has ever brought an empowered PLO leader who controlled the Palestinian national movement. No Hamas setting up Hamasistan in Gaza. Yasser Arafat, a risk-ready prime minister, Ehud Barak, who was able to put on the table elements of a proposal that certainly would and could not go far enough to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but went further, particularly on Jerusalem and territory, than any other Israeli prime minister and an American president who in the last 6 months of his term, with the image of the dead Yitzhak Rabin, whom he loved, and I use the word quite specifically, on whispering in one ear, and the late King Hussein, who died of cancer in 1999, whispering in the other. You have 6 months. Please do something. And by the end of the 13th day of that summit, on the 5 core issues that define this conflict, borders, security, refugees, Jerusalem, and end of all conflict and claims, the gaps between Israelis and Palestinians were wider than the Grand Canyon. Nothing, absolutely nothing that has occurred during the course of the last 25 years, even before the trauma and the brutality of October 7th and how the Israelis have responded, has deepened those gaps and called into question the viability, the centrality of two states. So when 2 of the 3 countries that Israel cares about in Europe, the third is the Germans, who have not yet spoken about this. France, member of the Security Council, nuclear power, on the G7, and Britain, the same. And now the Canadians, it's consequential. It reflects, I think, the moral quandary, particularly of Keir Starmer, who was a human rights lawyer. Macron, I'm sure, feels deeply, and Mark Carney. But it also reflects it reflects the failure of the Netanyahu government and the prime minister, who fashions himself a master on the world stage, that it has come to this point. But it does not reflect a serious policy in real time that can and will advance what I continue to believe is the only solution to the conflict. Two
So
states.
doesn't really, right now, recognizing a two-state, recognizing the Palestinian state, it's not really change, it's not world changing. It's
No, it doesn't, not only not world changing, it doesn't change anything on the ground. It'll only drive the Israelis deeper into their corner. And, you know, if Netanyahu needs to satisfy his right wing, although this is a unique period because between now and October 19, after the Jewish holidays, Benjamin Netanyahu is free from dissolution of the Knesset. So no, and you've seen the Trump administration reaction to this. I mean, Trump is now tying a trade deal with Canada, or the lack of one because of what the Canadians have done. So no, I think this was driven by internal politics, and certainly in France and in Britain. I think it was driven by the need to do something to, it can't change the pictures in Gaza, and this won't do that, but something needed to be said and done. And I'm sure that's the reason they move now. And I think all of them would concede to you that this was not the right time to do this. They're not going to get anything for it. Number one, nothing, except a lot of grief from Trump. And they won't be able to use it in any sort of negotiation, which I think was Starmer's approach at the right time. And he called it the time of maximum advantage, I think. They wanted to play this card. Well, they played it, or they will play it in September.
so the Arab League, however, is that also really mostly a statement, or is there actually something important in there? I mean,
Well,
can, for example, an Arab League task force really make a difference in Gaza? I mean, is there some real meaning to that?
I mean, the Arab states will play a role in all of the three questions that I asked. Who's going to govern Gaza? What or who is going to emerge in a sort of security architecture? And then who's going to pay for reconstruction? The Egyptians aren't on the money side, either the Jordanians. I mean, this is something the Gulf will have to defray, but they won't do it unless they believe that the war is over and the Israelis are prepared to build a bridge forward so that there is some hope and promise in the philosophical sense, not in the legal sense, that some progress could be made on the Israeli-Palestinian issue.
Well, there's another shift that's been happening, and that's really, there's been, I mean, we've had this for 2 years, and for many years before that, there's been really a propaganda war between Hamas and between Israel. It's certainly a war that Israel is not as successful as waging as its military war. And I guess I wanted to, and obviously right now it's focused on, as you said, malnourishment, starvation, deprivation, life in Gaza. And I'm wondering, what is your assessment of what's really going on in Gaza? I know this is a very hard question. And what are your sources on that? And can we trust sources like UN sources and the regular, the regular sources on this, and also Hamas, which is obviously controls the health ministry, and obviously, and can we trust? Can we trust the Israelis? And so, how do you assess this?
I think that you really have to. I mean, this really isn't a question for a 40,000-foot view to provide thematic altitude. You really would need to get down to the granular. A couple of things I can say. The absence of a strategy on humanitarian assistance is a collective failure.
Yes.
I'm criticized from one end of the universe to the other for even suggesting that Hamas or the UN plays any negative role in any of this. The storyline is clear. And in a way, from 40,000 feet, you would think that it sounds very compelling. Who controls the border? Egypt and Israel. Who controls the pace, the intensity, and the focus of military activity in Gaza? It is Israel, not even Egypt. Well, obviously, Israel has an adversary, but I think the Israelis have long ago accomplished hollowing out Hamas as a military organization. Hamas is now an insurgency, which is capable of killing and wounding Israeli soldiers through IEDs and ambushes, for sure. But I think it's a collective failure. And I think I think you would have to literally, and I spend what? Let's see, let's say I sleep for 8 hours. Lindsay and I'll spend several hours together. Maybe that's 10, 11. Most of my day is spent processing enormous amounts of information from all kinds of sources and talking to as many people as I possibly can. The granularity of this, what's actually happening on the ground, I think flows from several basic realities. Number one, you cannot feed, house, and minister to the needs of 2 million people in one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. And now that most of them are now concentrated in what? Somewhere under 20% of an area, 363 square kilometers, roughly twice the size of the District of Columbia. You cannot do that over a 2-year period in wartime Gaza. The two ceasefires, November 2003 and January 2005, did create a measure of stability. You had nearly 600 trucks between January and March getting to the border. But getting to the border is not distributing. And I'm certainly, Hamas is a vicious terror organization which exposed 2 million Palestinians to a level of death and destruction, disease and humanitarian disaster as a consequence of what they did on October 7. And frankly, it was part of Yahya Sinwar's notion that you must suffer for the cause. And as international pressure rose, as it is now, Hamas sees a certain amount of advantage here. But you need a predictable and regular environment in order to minister to that many people. And you have not had it. That's reality number one. How much aid is Hamas diverting? I think when you had commercial traffic going into Gaza from Egypt and Israel, plenty. I think Hamas was pilfering aid from smaller NGOs, from the Palestinian Red Crescent, but the Israelis have yet to demonstrate empirically that large amounts of UN distributed assistance, World Food Program, has been stolen by Hamas. There's a post on the UN website, I haven't took a look at it, in which someone is claiming that even by the UN's own standards, a large proportion of their trucks were attacked by quote unquote armed groups. So that's number one. Number two, Israel, from the inception, the 2 days after October 7th, when they imposed a blockade on everything until the ground campaign started on October 23rd, there was never a strategy to understand the importance, the necessity, that military power was a means to an end, but it had to be accompanied by something else. There's never been a strategy. Why? A combination of reasons: anger and hatred over what Hamas had done, The abuse of the hostages, the killing of the hostages, will be damned if we're going to supply an iota, a scintilla of assistance. Coalition politics, the most right-wing government in Israel's history, fundamental tensions with the UN and fundamental mistrust of the UN and the distribution system. So what you need is, I mean, this is so banal, it's ridiculous. Because what the Israelis have done opens things up, but it's by no means necessary, but not sufficient. You're going to need the Israelis to step up in a way they haven't before. You're going to need higher level UN representation to deal with the Israelis. And there's no trust and confidence there. You're going to need somehow a less rigorous screening process. And you're going to need the Israelis to try to secure humanitarian routes in order to allow the UN in. And the trickiest problem of all, how do you distribute aid in very close proximity to armed elements and the IDF? And I don't know the answer to that. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not the answer. And I'm hoping in this announcement tomorrow, we'll see another US approach to the issue of humanitarian assistance. David
Well,
Petraeus, I've interviewed him twice on my show at Carnegie, makes the point that you want to run an effective counterinsurgency, you want to beat Hamas, then you need to offer an alternative. You need to offer better security, better governance, and the prospects of prosperity. Do not need to willfully alienate an entire population by denying it the sustenance that they need. It's so elemental. And I did an interview with Wolf Blitzer. I said, Wolf, 3 of the Israeli prime ministers I worked for, and you know them all, Rabin, Barak, and Omer, 8-9 months after October 7, they may have all responded the way Netanyahu did, but 8 or 9 months later, they would have understood and recognized the companion piece to Israel's overwhelming military power. And the Netanyahu government, they can come up with any excuse they want. I heard the Israeli ambassador interviewed the day before yesterday. I don't even have a reaction. I mean,
well,
I won't react.
right now, there's a lot of worldwide pressure on Israel. Are we at a tipping point that Israel will have to make concessions that Israel would not have done in the past?
If there are concessions made, it won't be to the Europeans. It'll be made to the Trump administration.
Okay.
And whether or not Donald Trump is prepared to use leverage is an unknown question. I pointed out to someone that in the last 6 months, he has done what no other Republican or Democratic president or administration I ever worked for has done. In March, he unilaterally opened a dialogue with Hamas, sanctioning his hostage negotiator. They had 3 meetings. The Israelis had to learn about it after the fact. He cut a deal with the Houthis. The Israelis learned about it after the fact. He suspended sanctions against the Ahmed Shara government over the objections of Benjamin Netanyahu, and he opened negotiations with Iran over the objections of Benjamin Netanyahu. He is capable of being tough when he sees it in his interest to be tough. And I see only 3 circumstances where Donald Trump would conceivably move from words to pressure. Number 1, if he believed Netanyahu was using or to use his expression that he uses with Putin, tapping him along. Number 2, if the Israelis made him look weak. And number 3, if Netanyahu got between Donald Trump and something he really wanted. Whether we're at any of those points, I don't know.
And we're not close enough to an election because, as we've seen, and this is another shift, is that there was a Gallup poll released this week that shows that only 32% of US adults support Israel's military actions in Gaza. And only 9% of 18 to 34-year-olds. And so, I mean, he's very concerned about politics and about support. But I suppose this is not something that he's really concerned about. Trump is really concerned about at this particular point.
Well, remember, he obviously, Jeffrey Epstein business has shown that there are fractures within the MAGA base. But on Israel, look, the Republican Party, minus a few outliers, seem to be Israel right or wrong, or Israel can do no wrong.
Well,
Democratic Party is deeply divided.
yeah, and
Go ahead.
I tweeted out earlier before we hopped on how polarized Israel's support is now. Support is for Israel at this point, and
No,
that's
it is
awesome.
the one thing that concerns me most as someone who believes deeply in the importance of a special relationship with Israel, not an exclusive relationship, is the fracturing of bipartisanship. It is the one issue that has sustained the relationship more than any other. Not the presence of a large and influential Jewish community. That alone won't do it. Not the fact that we consider Israel a strategic ally. We do R&D. We exercise with them. We deploy equipment there. That's not enough. The moral debt that the U.S. owes to the Jewish people in the wake of the Nazi genocide, that's not enough. What is the central adhesive to this relationship? The one thing that most American allies, countries that are allied with the United States, and Saudi Arabia, by the way, is not an ally of the United States. I wish people would stop using this. This makes no sense. An ally of the U.S. is a country in which there's a high degree of coincidence of interests, there's a high degree of coincidence of values, and there's a strong basis of domestic support. In all three boxes, I have great concerns about what's happening to the U.S.-Israeli relationship in all three of these dimensions. Value affinity, the judicial reform alone. Of course, I can't, why would I mean, obviously, talk about glass houses. 2019 Freedom House reports that the world's two largest democracies, India and the United States, suffered the most precipitous democratic backsliding. And now it's worse. We shouldn't be lecturing anybody any undemocratic process right now. So, you know, Israel's basis of support in the United States is eroding. The value affinity proposition is very hard to defend right now, both on the internal political issue of Israel's efforts to rearrange, Netanyahu's efforts to rearrange the political furniture in Israel, emasculate the Supreme Court, and somehow beat his indictment. The Attorney General, by the way, today the committee was supposed to vote on whether or not she can be fired. And even if the Supreme Court intercedes, the government is talking about barring her from any meetings. They're going to make her irrelevant, try to make her irrelevant. So I worry greatly. And between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump on another issue, but related, I'm sorry to say, the two of them together are making Jews everywhere less, not more secure. That's another important, critically important issue here. But again, I mentioned the Washington Journal conversation this morning on C-SPAN. The callers, they're either fundamentally opposed to everything Israel is doing on one hand, or they are defending everything that Israel is doing. So what do you, and that's not the Jewish community. I mean, they may have been Jewish, I don't know. So what do you do with the Jewish community? Where are the Jewish leaders at a critical moment in the history of the American Jewish community? Where are they?
I think they're also polarized, and a few are trying to stay in the middle. But one thing that you and I know is how complex this situation is, and how unhelpful it is to be polarized, and how
Yes, we do.
big
It'll be fascinating to see how many rabbis this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur talk about Israel more than just let's bring the hostages home.
Yeah.
Fascinating. We'll see.
Well, I have a few more questions for you. One, so all the focus right now seems to be on Gaza, but there's a lot happening in the West Bank, and there's, there are extremist settlers in the West Bank, and they're continuing to, um, you know, make the lives of many Palestinians quite difficult, to put it mildly. And I'm just wondering, this hasn't really been getting the kind of attention it deserves, but it is a serious issue.
It
And,
is.
and it's coming from, and how, and just give us a little background about why this can happen right now.
No, I mean, I think you have a government. Yeah, and this is not random. The current Israeli government may be acquiescing and enabling it, but it's part of a concerted policy shaped by Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and enabled and acquiesced in by the prime minister. I mean, the average length of an Israeli government since independence is 1.9 years. That doesn't mean the governments change every 1.9 years, but the governments are reconstituted or changed. This government goes to term in 2026. In December of 2025, it'll be 3 years. This government, as Ben Franklin said about the British, I'm reading Rick Atkinson's Revolution trilogy. I'd recommend it to everybody. We're either going to hang together or we're going to hang separately. And I think this government has demonstrated a cohesiveness that bears that out, even among the ultra-Orthodox, who have complained about conscription and are threatening to dissolve the government in October if, in fact,
Because the other possibilities are far worse for them.
yeah, and I don't think they want, I mean, it's not a question of being a partner for an alternative government. I think they know that. So no, I think you're watching the annexation of the West Bank in everything but name, and even in name. And are people paying attention? Yeah. I mean, I'm co-chair of the New Israel Fund's International Board. NIF is paying attention. You're paying attention. A lot of groups are paying attention. But that can't stop the process that is underway. And Trump administration literally doesn't seem to, whether they're interested or not, you have a man of deep faith, Mike Huckabee, the first evangelical Christian who is U.S. ambassador to Israel. And he has very strong views about what should happen to the West Bank. So I wonder how, in Donald Trump's own conception of Israeli-Saudi normalization and a possible Nobel Peace Prize, he sees the West Bank figuring. Because right now, it doesn't figure. The Saudis are tripling down in terms of what they would demand, particularly as Palestinian deaths increase. So no, I think we all thought the West Bank, at least I did, the West Bank would be the locus of the explosion. And Jerusalem, which is the other thing. It is preternaturally calm. It's always fascinated me, given the stakes involved. Maybe that's exactly why there's a certain amount of restraint that Israelis and Palestinians exercise.
Well, since you brought it up, what would it take for Donald Trump to win a Nobel Peace Prize? What does he have to achieve in the Middle East to do that?
Well, it is the Nobel after all, and it's in Europe, obviously, has a certain, well, writ large, Europe and individual countries have certain views of Donald Trump. Barack Obama got a Nobel. It's not clear why. I think even he was probably
Surprise.
welcomed it, but he was surprised. Um, I mean, Ukraine, I think, would be the bigger play, but I think there, Donald Trump is more interested in ending the fighting rather than ending the war. And there's a huge difference in Ukraine because a ceasefire will not stop Vladimir Putin from continuing to pursue an asymmetrical warfare against Ukraine and even beyond. So again, I wonder whether in Gaza, the president's objective is to end the fighting, but not the war. Ending the war would mean embracing and grappling with the three questions that I posed and assuming the leadership on those issues, even while he would be deploying and cooperating with the Arab states and the Europeans in order to answer those questions. But you'd have to end the war in Gaza, and you'd have to pry out of the Netanyahu government. I referred to a bridge, something that would satisfy Mohammed bin Salman that he has enough cover to do what he wants to do. And then Trump would have to make sure that the US Saudi bilateral piece of this gets done because Saudis have things they want.
So, just quickly, Abbas has not been mentioned at all in all these conversations. What is he thinking right now?
I mean, how old is he? 88, 89? Poll numbers, he's in the 19th year of a 4-year term. I think that's right. 05. You do math, but it's not good. He's in single digits. Most certainly younger Palestinians don't take him seriously. They want a choice. They want to be empowered, but I'm not sure how you do that because you need elections. And it is interesting that I think Mark Carney basically had one of his conditions of recognizing Israel that the Palestinians would have elections. I just can't see that happening now. Palestinian national movement is fractured in a way it's never been before since the PLO was created in 64 and then taken over by Arafat in 68. I mean, I'm not an Israeli, and despite my critics, I don't play one on television. But if I were an Israeli, in addition to stopping settlement activity, the one sine qua non is that whoever leads Palestine has to be in a position to control all the guns. They have to have a monopoly over the forces of violence within Palestinian society. And I'm not talking about extremists. I'm talking about when a third or a quarter of the Palestinian national movement decides it has a different ideology, a different philosophy, and it's going to set up shop somewhere else while it plans to take over the other 2/3, Fatah versus Hamas. That's got to be solved. In the wake of October 7, how? I mean, I know Israelis who were way, way left of center who said to me, I don't ever want to see a Palestinian with a gun. I mean, that was not directed at Hamas. That was directed at Palestinian security officials. So I don't know how you get over that because I live in Chevy Chase, right around on the Maryland District line. I don't care whether it's Chevy Chase, Maryland. I'm in Maine now. One of the elements, the attributes of governance is the capacity to maintain monopoly on the forces of violence in your city. And we have a gun problem here, but we don't yet have, and we have mass killings, but we don't yet have organized group that's seceding from the United States to set up its own two sets of security services, two constitutions, two governing structures. It can't happen. So, and Abbas couldn't control it. Arafat had many flaws, and I've never really understood in the end what motivated him. I was probably the last American, unofficial, because I was out of government, in October of 2004. I saw Arafat in his Muqata. This is 3 weeks before the French medevaced him to Paris, where he died. I never really understood. I guess I never really understood Arafat. Rabin thought he did, and recognized that Arafat had done some very tough things in the initial phases of Oslo. But the one thing, Arafat controlled Palestinian violence and deployed it as he believed necessary. But he never would have allowed Hamas to basically rule Gaza. Never would have happened. But it happened, and it's hard to put this back in the box now.
Okay, well, I have one last question, and I'm gonna let you go. I've been thinking in 2013, I actually wrote a column, and it was looking about how people have been saying for as long as I remember, time is running out for Israel. Something has to happen, and also there is no partner. These are the two phrases you hear all the time. And is there a partner? Is there more of a partner now than, or more possibility of, like with the Arab League, making this, stepping into the conversation at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, I tend to, I mean, I got two grown kids and four grandkids. When people ask me, and they often do, I get emails, what do you mean two states? What do you mean? People want to kill us. My response is, I occupy a tiny space on the planet for a very short period of time. I do not understand morally how it is possible for anyone, any human, who knows that the time is short, how can you make global predictions about what can never be? I've never really understood that logically. I don't have the right to do that. I wouldn't do it to my children or my grandchildren. I certainly don't have the right to do it to complete strangers, Israelis and Palestinians. No, I choose to believe, because you can't see what's in front of you, for good or ill, in possibility. They asked Joe Biden what his definition of America was. And his one-word answer was possibility. I believe that. And I've used this many times, probably in moment webinars. I borrowed this from Jack Kennedy. I'm an idealist without illusion. To me, that is where I think that might actually offer, if we had leaders who wanted to change the world, really change it, but who had their eyes wide open and were committed to that process with all the political and psychological obstacles of what it takes to do something like that, who knows? So yeah, I think there is promise and I think there is possibility. And I don't see how you can argue, even in the wake of October 7th. And I would never try to appropriate, diminish, trivialize the traumas that Israelis have felt and will continue to feel, and what Gazans have been through. So let's leave it at that. My kids say, Dad, is it going to be okay? I always say, it's going to be okay.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Nadine.